Today we will talk about the DNA as a genetic material. First, we will discuss what the genetic material is. Genetic material is simply a substance which controls the transfer of traits from parents to offsprings, or which controls the transmission of or inheritance of traits from one generation to another generation, and also express itself in the phenotype of an organism. So we write down what the genetic material is. We will discuss about the DNA as a genetic material. First we will talk about what the genetic material is. Genetic material is the substance which controls the inheritance of traits, from one generation to next and also express itself in the phenotype of an organism, and also expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. So this is the definition of the genetic material. I told you that genetic material is that substance which is transmitted from parents to offsprings, which controls the inheritance of traits, and also this substance is able to express itself in the phenotype of an organism. Now the question arises that how it expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. Actually, this is the effect of the genetic material. Genetic material shows its effect by the formation of specific biomolecules which are responsible for the formation and functioning of the biological traits in the living organisms. So we have the parents transmit the genetic material to the offsprings, or we can say that this substance gets transmitted from one generation to the another generation, and also this substance is able to express itself in the phenotype of an organism. There are two main fundamental properties which are associated with the genetic material. That is, two main fundamental properties which are associated with the genetic material. That is replication and expression. What this replication is, that this genetic material is able to synthesize its own carbon copies. It is able to synthesize itself. So it is one of the important, that is called as replication. When a substance synthesizes itself, that is called as replication. It synthesizes its own carbon copies, what is called as replication. And then what do you mean by expression? Expression simply means that this substance expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism by the formation and functioning of specific biomolecules, and then these biomolecules are responsible for the formation and functioning of specific biological characters in a living organism. That means it replicates, it synthesizes itself, and then it shows its effect in the phenotype of an organism. That is called as expression. We know that this genetic material, it contains hundreds and thousands of genes are associated with the genetic material. Two substances, I can say, they are the potent candidatures for the genetic material, and they are the nucleic acids. So we have nucleic acids. This nucleic acid acts as a genetic material in living organism. We have two types of nucleic acids. One is DNA Another is RNA. This nucleic acid, it acts as a genetic material in living organisms. So we have DNA is a nucleic acid, RNA is a nucleic acid. So DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid and RNA is ribose nucleic acid. This DNA, it is a genetic material in almost all the living organisms. It is genetic material in prokaryotes. This genetic it is genetic material in prokaryotes. It is genetic material in eukaryotes. It is also this DNA, it is genetic material in some viruses. For example, adenovirus, DNA is a genetic material. Same is the case smallpox virus, DNA is a genetic material. Or T2 bacteriophage, T2 bacteriophage, DNA is a genetic material. Herpes virus, DNA is a genetic material. So DNA is a genetic material in almost all the living organisms, in prokaryotes, in eukaryotes, and in some viruses, for example, adenovirus, smallpox virus, T2 bacteriophage virus, and herpes virus. And RNA, that is ribose nucleic acid, it is a genetic material exclusively in riboviruses, or what we called retroviruses, in viruses known as riboviruses. These riboviruses also called as retroviruses. Retroviruses, where RNA is a genetic material, and this RNA is a genetic material in most of the plant viruses. In most of the plant viruses, RNA is a genetic material. It is a genetic material in tobacco mosaic virus, TMV virus. We have tomato mosaic virus, TOMV, tomato mosaic virus. Then also in other viruses, for example, HIV virus, or in for example coronavirus, that is also ribovirus. Coronavirus, it is also a ribovirus, coronavirus. So RNA can act as a genetic material as well as DNA can act as a genetic material. This genetic material, it gets transmitted, it gets transferred from one generation to another generation, and also the genetic material expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. How it expresses itself? By the formation and functioning of specific biomolecules which are responsible for the biological traits in living organisms. There are this is what do you mean by genetic material, and which can act as a genetic material. DNA can act as a genetic material in almost all the living organisms. RNA can also act as a genetic material, but it is in viruses. Now, one of the important thing, that is what are the properties of genetic material? What are the important properties of genetic material? So, properties of genetic material. Properties of genetic material. This we can. What are the important properties of genetic material? So we have properties of genetic material. Features of genetic material, we can say. Features of genetic material. The most important feature of the genetic material is replication. Replication. That means this genetic material, it is able to synthesize its own carbon copies. That means this genetic material, whether DNA, for example, it synthesizes its own carbon copies. It synthesizes itself. That is called as replication. If DNA synthesis, it is called as DNA replication, and RNA synthesis, it is called as RNA replication. So here replication simply means that this it has ability to synthesize itself, synthesize its own carbon copies, its own carbon copies, synthesize its own carbon copies. We call that replication. DNA can synthesize its own carbon copies, that is called as DNA replication, and RNA can synthesize its own carbon copies, that is called as RNA replication. Then we have inheritance. This genetic material, it controls the genetic material, it controls the transmission of characters, traits from parents to offsprings, or it controls the transmission of biological traits from one generation to another generation, that is called as inheritance. So this, what do you mean by inheritance? That means the transmission of characters, the transmission of traits from one generation to the another generation, that is called as inheritance. This genetic material has ability to control the inheritance. That means transmission of traits from one generation to next, from one generation to next, that is called as inheritance. Then another feature of this, another property of the genetic material is that it is able to expression. This expression, actually it is the effect of the genetic material. That means this genetic material expresses, it expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. Now the question arises that how it expresses itself. It expresses itself by the formation and functioning of specific biomolecules, that is proteins, and these biomolecules are responsible for the biological traits in a living organism. That means it expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. Expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism. This expression. Then this genetic material, it has ability to undergo mutation. This genetic material has ability to undergo mutation. That means, what do you mean by mutation? Mutation is sudden, we can say that alteration in the genetic material of an organism, or a change in the genetic material of an organism, that is mutation. Mutation is a change or alteration in the genetic material of an organism. Change or alteration in the genetic material of an organism. This mutation, it leads to evolution. Then the genetic material, it has ability to have a role in evolution. This evolution is descent with modification. So the genetic material, it has ability to have a role in the evolution of the living organism. So it is called as descent with modification. Evolution is descent with modification. Evolution is descent with modification. This genetic material has specific size, structure, and function. This is another property. It has specific size, structure and function. These are some of the important properties or features which are associated with the genetic material. So it has ability to replicate itself, replication. It has ability to get transmitted from parents to offsprings, from one generation to another, that is inheritance. It expresses itself in the phenotype of an organism, that is expression. It undergoes mutation, that is alteration in the genetic material of an organism. It have role in evolution. Evolution is simply descent with modification. It has specific size, structure and function. So these are the important properties of the genetic material. There were some of the important scientists who have contributed in the discovery of the genetic material. There was a scientist that his name was Friedrich Mister. Scientist whose name was Friedrich Mister. This Friedrich Mister, he discovered the substance which is responsible for heredity in the nucleus of pus cells of owl. Nucleus of pus cells of owl, and he named this substance as nuclein. This Friedrich Mister, the scientist, he discovered a substance which was responsible for heredity in the nucleus of pus cells of owl, and he named this substance nuclein. As this substance was present in nucleus, so he named it nuclein. Then it was an Altman. This Altman, he used the term nucleic acid. The term nucleic acid was used by Altman because of the acidic nature of this nuclein. This Altman, he named nuclein as nucleic acid. Because of the acidic nature of nuclein, this Altman, he used the term nucleic acid for the nuclein. He used the term nucleic acid for the nuclein. Then Fischer, this scientist discovered nitrogenous bases, purines and pyrimidines in the DNA. The Fischer, he discovered purines and pyrimidines in DNA. And Levin, he discovered phosphate group and deoxyribose sugar in DNA. Another person, Levin, he discovered purine. This phosphate group. Levin discovered phosphate group and deoxyribose sugar in the DNA. Ribose, phosphate group, phosphate group, and plus deoxyribose sugar in DNA. Deoxyribose sugar in DNA. This Levin, he discovered phosphate group and deoxyribose sugar in DNA. The major breakthrough in the discovery of a genetic material was given by Franklin and Wilkin. They got the X-ray photographs of the DNA. This Wilkin and Franklin. In 1953, they got the X-ray photographs of the DNA. X-ray photographs of DNA. So X-ray photographs of DNA were worked out by Wilkin and Franklin. X-ray photographs of DNA. And which were awarded Nobel Prize for the character model of DNA, they were Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick, two persons which have revolutionized the molecular biology. Those were Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick. This Watson and Crick, they gave the correct model of DNA, double helical model of DNA, by studying the X-ray photographs which were given by Franklin and Wilkin. So they give the correct model of DNA, double helical model of DNA, double helical model of DNA. Watson and Crick, they gave the double helical model of the DNA. They actually studied the X-ray photographs of Franklin and Wilkin, and ultimately came up with the correct model of the DNA, what is called a double helical model of the DNA. And they actually published their work in an article under the heading "The Structure for Deoxyribonucleic Acid." They published the article "The Structure for Deoxyribonucleic Acid." Structure for deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Structure for deoxyribonucleic acid in a British journal, that was Nature, in 1953. And this Watson, Crick, they were awarded Nobel Prize along with the Wilkins in 1962. For their double helical model which they proposed in 1953, they were awarded Nobel Prize in 1962. These were the important points regarding the DNA. What is genetic material? What is genetic material? What are the important properties of the genetic material, and people who have contributed in the genetic material? Thank you.